it's been haphazard, to say the least. I never started as a marketer. So there was a middle period in the Indian economy where the sensibility of running a business was very low. The noise of running a business was very high.
Are you talking about the whole irrational exuberance?
If you look at the FMCG trajectory that has happened in this country, right, and the consumption evolution that has happened in the country, it's not happened in terms of new money, it's happened in old money. India doesn't have a dearth of data. We actually have a surplus of dirty data. So phone numbers are useless, email addresses are like boy1001@hotmail.com.
So in some sense, retention is not just a marketer's problem, it's everyone's problem.
I think retention is a business problem, man.
Hi there. Welcome to the State of Retention Marketing podcast. I'm thrilled to have you join us for episode 38, kicking off season 2 with a fresh outlook. Now, if you're sure, chances are either you're fascinated or maybe even spooked by the topic of user engagement and retention. Either way, you've come to the right place. This episode is particularly special to me because it's not every day I encounter somebody as refreshingly candid as our guest today, Samriddh Gupta. With 20 years of experience under his belt as a brand builder, for the most part, and a fractional FAMO in the past few months, he's not afraid to speak his mind, even if it means stirring up some debate. From questioning the irrational exuberance of Indian startups to challenging the VC money-driven acquisition strategies, Samriddh holds strong opinions. We dive into topics like the role of a chief retention officer in a boardroom. We dissect agency partnerships, ROI expectations, and metrics in the retention landscape. And don't miss out on his insights on how Indian brands are navigating the retention game and the gaps they need to fill. So well, whether you agree or disagree, there's something in today's conversation for everyone. Tune in.
Samriddh, thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love to very simply have a broad contour of your journey through these 20 years.
Yeah.
And what have been the key choices and turning points?
Oh, it's been haphazard, to say the least. Okay, so college, I wanted to get in the army, took my CDS, cleared that, went into the armed forces, broke my neck, came back into the civilian life.
Okay.
That was cool.
Life.
Yeah, life. Had worked in filmmaking for a bit before that, realized that I like the idea of storytelling, creative businesses, and I always looked at the creative side as a business. I was never particularly very creative myself, but I understood the dynamics of that business. Started an agency with a bunch of folks, 4 of us, 10 years down, 140 odd people, worked across the length and breadth of India, and early days, this was essentially from around 2004 to about 2014, 15. We were working with emerging businesses, SMEs, second generation businesses who wanted to go the digital way.
Sure.
So a lot of young folks had come back on the back of manufacturing capacity that was built by their families. Now, these manufacturing capacities were fairly robust. These were very large businesses, right? So I'm talking about businesses which were in those days doing upwards of 70, 80 crores anyways, and extremely profitable. Now, all these young folks had come back and they wanted to sort of take that one leap of faith into turning manufacturing into a brand, from that brand into a distribution model, and then further sort of see what they could do with it in terms of digital expansion.
Yeah, orbit changing
So,
maneuvers.
yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, massive pivotal spaces for them to get into. And I realized I had an opportunity there, right? Because there were large incumbent agencies which didn't essentially understand India as a whole.
Or digital either.
Or digital either. See, digital, everyone was learning, yeah? So it's
Sure.
not it's not like we knew a lot.
Fair.
We potentially knew a little more than others,
Hmm.
but it's not like we knew everything. So that 10-year journey was essentially sort of breaking this entire digital ecosystem up into bits and atoms and seeing what we could excel at.
Sure.
So we started to excel at a bunch of things which went across the length and breadth of, consumer technology, consumer products, some degree of research capacity, but a lot of creative inputs, which would grow across the funnel, right?
Okay.
And interesting, I'm saying funnel because there was no funnel ideology there.
The
but
definition of the funnel itself seems to be a relatively
but
easy one.
for us, it was always that.
Sure.
Right? So I think we did really well. Worked with large organizations, took some organizations to an IPO level. My company itself was pretty well settled.
40 people is a lot of people.
I had burnt out by the time I was 25. By the time I was 30, 33, 34. And I was like, man, this is it. I can't do this anymore. Because you start by the time you're around 23 and then you do it for about 10 odd years. You don't sleep enough. And that's when I realized that, listen, I potentially have a lot more to give. Built my own ship, ran it for a bit, had a good time, but let's see let's see what's out there, right? I joined the Times Group to work on a business called Dine Out. Extremely lucky. Dine Out had just been acquired, and Times was essentially trying to build the first almost restaurant operating system in the country. And again, it was a very SaaS to a D2C play, which was let's first build the operating system and then try to get consumers in. So superbly fun, lots of energy. I think that energy sort of remains. Very good space, very early stage. So again, a category creation mandate. Suddenly went from leading a team of 140 people to leading a 14-member team. And I'm like, something's off. Build that up. Learned a lot. Learned consumer tech, consumer products. Learned the app ecosystem, because that was the transitional phase in the Indian economy.
Like the
this was about 2015. So 2014, 2015.
Beginning to be upward curve.
Just about the upward curve. Very early stage app ecosystems. Mostly apps till pre that were web-based apps, and this one was where
brands were still deciding that they need to have apps, and then I think Minstrel
it was mostly like PWAs.
Go app only for some reason.
Yeah, so it was like PWAs for a while, and then people would oscillate between having a website to having an app. There was, of course, no one system that would run them all, so everything was native.
This was pre-Jio, which means that even the penetration for smartphones and all of that was still
much less. Negligible. Almost nothing, right? And then there was still that CDMA versus the GSM war. All those things were happening. Very interesting times, though, from a telco perspective. Very interesting times from a VAS perspective. I was in a media space, which was essentially looking at data. We were looking at working with restaurants, so it was an online to an offline business. There were two spectrums to what we were trying to build. So very, very early stage sort of cohort analysis, ensuring that we are acquiring people and then retaining people downstream, right?
Well, because cohorts back then, huh? That's interesting.
We had to, right? Because one, it was expensive. It's always been expensive to do business, especially when you are a business that's been acquired by another company. Frugality is the boardroom conversation.
Put it on your,
right?
You can't not be frugal.
Yeah, you have to be frugal. There is no other way. And you have skin in the game, so you want to be as frugal as you can be.
Sure.
So that's how the journey started in terms of going into marketing. So my submission of my marketing journey is actually potentially only 10 years, right? So my overall media creative...
is also a fair bit of exposure.
Yeah,
right?
so I'm saying, the
different aspects of marketing.
The definition of marketing, which is, you've worked in the marketing team where you potentially become a brand manager. That for me would have been about 10 odd years, but I never started as a brand manager. I straight away went into a CMO role.
Yeah.
So, it was...
That's fun, no?
It had its challenges. I'm not going to be... I'm not going to say that...
You sound like somebody who enjoys being out of depth, right? Sometimes.
For a short while.
Yeah, okay.
For a very short while. But you just have to build systems around you.
Of course.
So, I realized very early on that I'm very good at building systems that work for me. Right? And I work with a certain degree of method to the madness. If that's not there, then I potentially will be very dysfunctional as things go ahead. Yeah.
Safe to say orchestrator more than a firefighter?
Oh, I hate firefighting.
Exactly.
I think if you have to firefight, then you might as well...
Something is not designed very well.
Yeah, you're doing something wrong. I love the idea of being as planned as I can be before I go into warfare. Sure. Right? And I think that just came naturally. I was able to do it well. In some sense,
the journey from Dine Out onwards, or to Dine Out as well, was a very well-planned kind of series of moves?
Absolutely not.
I was wondering, on one side you said you're planned, and on the other side your journey was happening.
So the career has not been planned. What I have done in my stints has been very well planned. I'm happy. I've had more successes than I have had failures, which also is a very comforting thing to have. And I'm deeply thankful, because I don't think it's me. I think I just have a lot of very good people punting for me.
It's a combination, sure. So
yeah, and I don't know. Actually, I don't know.
Well, how does it matter?
Yeah, how does it matter, right? It's worked
you
well,
got away with it, right?
It's worked well, it's worked well. But over the last 10, 15 odd years, the kind of skill sets that I've picked up now, I think are what a lot of people are trying to get, primarily because businesses are being run with the same sensibility again.
Fair enough.
Right? So there was a middle period in the Indian economy where the sensibility of running a business was very low. The noise of running a business was very high.
Sure. Are you talking about the whole irrational exuberance? Is that the other word for what you're trying to say?
I'm just talking about the ridiculous amount of money that was plowed into the system. You can call it irrational
exuberance.
Whatever other words you're being very kind,
right?
But I just say it was just a rampant amount of capital infusion.
And which basically meant the whole sensibility of running business went haywire.
Absolutely. I think it created a lot of bad behavior. It created a lot of bad behavior, and it's no one's fault. When you have the money, you need to deploy the money. When the money comes in, you have to find a way to use that money. When you use the money, you start to create behavior patterns, both consumer as well as vendors, which instills a lot of very unfavorable situations later on in life,
Sure.
which you don't realize at
Yeah.
that moment, right? And I don't think it's a very popular sentiment, but I believe that businesses need to be run on the back of extreme amounts of frugality, certain amount of both sort of ethical framework of sensibility and corporate governance. If you have that, then you're sort of well
popular or
sorted,
not,
right?
but this is the reality, right?
But boss, India
I'm
was built
guessing
like
this
that.
whole acknowledgement of this, there couldn't be a louder acknowledgement of these things given the last couple of years have been very different from how that period
But you know
was.
what's surprising is India was always built on that.
I'm
We're
a
a trading
Marwadi.
economy.
I'm a Marwadi. So I can fully
Yeah.
understand, respect, appreciate.
Right.
That, okay, why are we spending all of this stuff on all of this? Those questions were always asked and were always considered legit.
Correct. Correct. And also, I think because we came from a situation of want,
Right.
the economy came from a situation of want. We came out of a very difficult colonization period, and then we had to
course.
rebuild everything.
We're still in that process.
We're still in the process. And because a large portion of this is agrarian and trading, I think the fundamentals of business were very deeply entrenched into the economy.
Sure.
And the holders of the business were very clear about what they were doing.
And they've done their part well. They've exceeded. And you
That
spoke
is
about all
what,
bunch
by
of
the way,
these
all of us at this very
second gen.
moment are still living off to a very, very large extent.
You could say so.
If you look at market dynamics, if you look at large scale manufacturing, if you look at the distribution models that were built, if you look at the FMCG trajectory that has happened in this country, right, and the consumption evolution that has happened in the country, it's not happened in terms of new money, it's happened in the old money.
Yeah.
What we are
I think the
doing now is we
efficiencies
are
of those
building
systems are
interventions of new money to come in and disrupt old money.
Which have not necessarily always worked because the efficiencies of some of those non-arbitrage based systems and I wouldn't call it non-arbitrage perhaps, but a fair bit of efficiency, right? You talk about FMCG supply chains, the same distributor actually is sitting in his tempo and actually going and doing deliveries, and there is no way to build an organizational corporate structure which will be more efficient than that.
Correct.
So if you're going to try and disrupt that system by a VC-funded ecosystem which is going to have its own 20 layers of overheads, it's never going to be competitive.
See, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there has been a population explosion to a very large extent, and people need jobs, and those jobs need to be created through private enterprise, and private enterprise will need capital infusion to build those ecosystems. But my challenge from any kind of business lens has always been about the success metrics that we start to chase at the end of the day.
Which for a fair bit of period had become valuation.
Exactly, right? And it's bloated, and it's contentious at best. And I'm going to stop because
no, that's all right.
If I want to say anything more, then it's a problem.
The fun fact is, I've had multiple conversations, one including Rajanandan, who's a fairly vocal person as far as this topic is concerned. So I don't think you will say anything which, in some sense, sounds more.
I can go on, but
in some sense sounds
we'll
more
brutal from the main topic today.
Yeah, well, I think so. It gets links back perfectly nicely to the topic it had, simply because we believe that a sensible business, which is meant to last and meant to be built for a longer haul, has to be extremely mindful of retention, if not from the day T minus 3 months, at least on D0.
Yeah.
And I've had this, lens from multiple founders who are second-time founders.
Yeah.
And while, of course, we talk about product versus distribution and those dynamics, but at least as far as the lens on how am I building customer lifetime value and how am I getting people back and how my customer acquisition cost is going to get mitigated is not an afterthought.
Yeah.
It's something they think about when they're designing the business plan itself. That, okay, this is my expected retreat rate or return rate in a, let's say, 3-month window, 6-month window, 9-month window. And it seems to be the part which was kind of overlooked for a period in between. And that's why we were chatting offline about the fact that the state of retention marketing, it kind of got a big shove, from the behind. Just after when this whole funding thing started to dry.
About 2.5 years back, right? So I'm going to step back just a little bit. Okay. I think there's one thing that we need to recognize which is supremely important. And unfortunately, this is what a lot of VC money was pulled into India through, which is India's very large market. Actually, India is not a very large market.
This keeps getting debated, but I'd love to hear your
It's not. And I'll fundamentally tell you why, at least my perspective.
Sure.
I think it is a very large populace, but the ability to purchase is getting limited, and the kind of businesses or products that are being made which need to command a premium for the business to start making sense.
Sure.
That addressable market is very small.
That can be held true, but that doesn't necessarily mean India is a small market. I'll say the businesses that are being attempted are attempting a small TAM. Right. They're all competing with the same audience.
Because my context was the VC money flew in.
True, yeah, fair.
Right? So a lot of money came in because, hey, I want to create the next this for India, right?
Sure.
And, you know, a lot of this was, of course, US based.
Yeah.
There's homogeneity to the market. There is a language advantage to that market. There is a higher debt in that
Consumption
market.
pattern, per capita
Yeah,
income.
much higher
various
debt in that
several
market.
variables.
So all of that is there, right? So
Enabling infrastructure, I think there's a big change in the last 5-7
everything.
years.
In India, if you have to sell between, in one room, you're looking at potentially 3 different demographics, 4 different psychographics,
Sure.
20 kinds of language barriers, all of that, right? So within this one building where we are right now, you won't have a
Way more
one size
complex.
fits all, right? You won't have a one size fits all. So when people started to build for India, and you know, go back to like the Facebook interest cohorts, you have a 18 to a 54, you have men, women interested in cars, this. Dude, that was it. So now you have 2,000 brands, maybe
All
even
going
more,
after the same.
all going after that same consumer set.
Sure.
So now the consumer is sitting, as a user, I've got my phone, I'm scrolling through, I see one ad on Instagram who's selling me shoes, another one is selling me socks, another one is selling me chaddis, and I'm like, dude, what the hell, dude? Because everyone's selling me something or the other, right?
Yeah.
Starting from a toothpaste, to a car, to travel, to healthcare. Everyone is selling to me.
Sure.
Everyone is selling to anyone who has a particular kind of a smartphone, which now the entry barriers are extremely low. Age, thankfully now I don't, like now that I'm post 40, I don't get a lot of ads, which is fine. I think
Really? You don't? I thought this is the people who have the money to spend.
I get different kinds of ads.
Yeah.
Different kinds of ads, which I don't really want to speak about, but
Sure,
yeah,
of course.
like ghutne mein dard hai, baal jhad rahe, all of that. But that is fine.
Sure.
I get those ads. But what I've realized, and I think a lot of businesses have realized, is that the addressable chunk is this. The share of wallet is constantly increasing for different kinds of brands. Now, this links back to the retention piece. I have acquired you.
Yeah.
But there are 20 other brands also which want to acquire you. Right? If I can't retain you, then I'm essentially either I have paid you to go and buy it from another brand.
I've created the category.
No, because the first time I'm paying you, no?
Sure.
Most businesses, the first purchase is mostly the businesses losing money and they're paying you.
Or
But
paying
not
Google.
that. Yeah.
Or paying the advertising platforms to get you in.
Overall, they're losing money, right?
Yeah,
overall, you more often than not, a business in the first sale, the first transaction, you are most likely going to lose money. You start to make
the so-called argument around CAC and lifetime value, right?
Yeah.
So, sure.
And then comes the LTV.
Yep.
That's when it starts to get a little meatier.
Hmm.
But if I have to start spending a lot of money to even retain you, then essentially I still consider that to be the first sale.
Sure.
Right? I think that's fundamentally where the conversation has started to shift to over the last 2 years.
So
the state of retention marketing for me is where now suddenly people are like, okay, I have acquired someone. I've spent a whole bunch of effort, money, bandwidth, whatever you want to call it. I've put this entire large machinery in place. I've got you. Now I do need to retain you for a short period of time, long period of time, whatever I can do successfully.
Sure.
Assuming that you have multiple products, or assuming that your product has a habit formation
repeat behavior.
Yeah. Right. Assuming that the attribution that you need is not just a website-based attribution, but maybe at some stage you can attribute some degree to a marketplace.
Sure.
Some degree to an offline channel. Now, I have had the privilege of working across a very large-scale omni-channel player.
Sure.
So for us, attribution used to be a lot easier because, of course, the POS was in our control.
Yep.
Data sets were very first-party data-driven. The sort of starting from CDP
Unification
to the
was a
ERP,
day zero
everything
topic.
was ours. It was a ground-up stack that was built for the pet.
Stuff which is a luxury was a day zero thing available to you.
Yeah. I'm actually, even pre that, right? So, I mean, I was looking at patterns which would help me look at propensity of conversion through and through. And then we would look at what stage in the funnel would you drop off, right? And when you start to do that with lakhs and lakhs of customers in a month, it starts to get really interesting because you see data patterns emerging across. But most brands don't have that privilege. Or a lot of brands don't have that privilege.
Especially the ones which are legacy systems to transform to this several years away, in some sense.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I keep saying this, India doesn't have a dearth of data. We actually have a surplus of dirty data. And
useless, not actionable, not ready to be used. So
nothing, right? So phone numbers are useless, email addresses are like boy1001@hotmail.com. Abhi bhi aate, by the way.
Sure.
I don't know how those exist.
Yeah.
And addresses are लाल वाले स्कूटर के साइड में एक पेड़ के नीचे. By the way, those happen.
Yeah,
yeah,
that
like,
happens.
if you
So,
if you look at the kind of data that D2C brands end up getting, someone should write a book on this because it's hilarious.
I'm sure.
The names, email addresses, phone numbers, addresses. It's just like this whole sort of, it's theatrical almost.
It's discovering India all over again.
It's actually an alternate India that you potentially have never heard of, right? So it's very
Agree.
theatrical, it's very absurd, and it's entertaining. But a lot of businesses lose a lot of money because of that.
Sure.
A lot of businesses put a lot of effort in building that funnel, and then they realize that that data was too dirty. So now we can't
Fair.
do much about it.